Thanks a lot, Brian. It's a pleasure to be here. So as Brian said, what I hope to accomplish today is to sort of give you an overview of the biology of aging, and in particular, why I believe that this area of research really has the potential to change the paradigm for the way that we think about approaching medicine and human health. And so what I want to do is start by talking a little bit about, talking a little bit about the way that we have typically approached health and medicine, at least in the United States over the last century. Really, the focus has been on disease. And what I mean by that is that typically we wait until somebody develops one of these diseases, and then we try to either cure the disease or at least alleviate the symptoms. And so what's shown here are really the major causes of death and disability in developed countries around the world. And what often gets missed when we think about health or disease is that really all of these disorders have at their root a single greatest risk factor. And that risk factor is not how much you eat or whether you smoke or how much alcohol you consume or whether you exercise. It's how old you are. And so I think what has emerged is that there really is a biology of aging that is driving your risk of developing any one or multiple of these disorders. And I think we can debate whether the biology of aging causes these diseases, but I think what is not debatable is that at a minimum, aging is permissive for these diseases. And what I mean by that is that the changes that happen within our bodies as we get older allows these diseases to manifest themselves, whether it's directly causal or not. And so one of the implications of that is that if we can understand at the cellular, molecular, genetic, biochemical level what aging is, we have the potential to actually intervene in that biology, delay the onset and progression of all of these diseases at the same time. And so that's what I'm referring to as 21st century medicine. And as I'll talk more about, I think we're at the point now where we really can start to think seriously about targeting aging directly to have this effect of broadly improving health and delaying or preventing multiple age-related diseases at the same time. This is a list of one way that people have sort of formalized this biology called the hallmarks of aging. There are 9 of them. And for the purposes of my talk today, it's not really so important what they are. The point that I want to make is that we have a much better understanding of this biology. And in principle, any of these hallmarks can be targeted through interventions. That could be nutritional, it could be drugs, it could be lifestyle changes. But if we can target these hallmarks of aging, we really have an opportunity to modify the biology of aging in a way that will maximize health span. And in fact, the field has been pretty successful at doing this in laboratory animals. So this is not a comprehensive list, but it's a list of several of the most effective genetic approaches. And what I mean by that is that in laboratory animals, it's possible to actually modify the DNA in a targeted way. And when we do that, we can target specific genes and see that the aging process is slowed down and lifespan is extended. There are also drugs or lifestyle modifications that have this effect of slowing aging and maximizing healthy longevity. So this is a partial list. It's not everything. But the point is that we now have several opportunities where we know in a laboratory system that we can change aging. And the hope is that some, maybe all of these will have similar effects on the aging process in more complicated animals like people. So now I want to start to address the question. So I've told you that at least in laboratory animals, as a field, we've been very successful at modulating the aging process. And I think, maybe the most important question in the field today is, how do we actually start to bring some of what we've learned in these laboratory studies into the real world and evaluate whether these interventions actually have an effect on the aging process in people? And there are a variety of approaches that people are taking. Some people are trying to design clinical trials to look at specific age-related indications. Some people are trying to develop what we call biomarkers, which are surrogate markers where we can make predictions about whether the interventions are having the expected effect on the biology of aging in people. And the approach that we've been taking at the University of Washington is to actually ask whether or not we can have an impact in an animal that lives in the human environment and ages at a rate that is about 70 times faster than people do. So this is something we call the Dog Aging Project. And because dogs age so much more rapidly than people, we can accomplish in 10 years what would take 70 years to accomplish in humans, at least in terms of following dogs over a majority of their lifespan. So that's goal number one, understand aging. And then goal number two is to actually do something about it, to actually understand whether or not interventions that modulate the biology of aging in laboratory animals have similar effects in pet dogs. And that will be accomplished through randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trials to actually start to test some of these interventions. And I'll come back to that at the end of my talk.
A lot of the interventions that slow aging have been proposed to potentially affect COVID-19 response. And I know you looked into whether there was any funding available to study the effects of aging on COVID. So maybe you can tell us your findings.
Yeah, sure. Brian's setting me up to see if I'll say something that'll get me in trouble. But I mean, I think, so the context here is that when it became clear that COVID-19 was a severe health risk worldwide, the federal government of the United States set aside a large amount of money for basic and clinical research on COVID-19. And they distributed that money through the National Institutes of Health, which is made up of several component institutes. And the vast majority of that research money went to the institute that is focused on allergy and infectious disease. That makes sense. COVID-19 is an infectious disease. Some of it went to other institutes. What concerns me is that despite the fact that age and aging is the greatest risk factor for COVID-19, everybody agrees on that, none of the federal funding for COVID research went to the National Institute on Aging, which just seems crazy to me. And I think reflects a lack of appreciation and understanding of how far the research on the biology of aging has
This
come.
is really just continuing a trend, you know. I mean, the aging research has been woefully underfunded for decades, but through the NIH and other agencies as well, even though we know it's the biggest risk factor for everything. And I think that this is one of the problems that keeps us from getting out of this sick care approach where we treat people by waiting until they get sick. And then trying to do things that usually keep them sick, but maybe keep them alive longer, to more of a healthcare approach. And you know, you have the biggest risk factor for everything. Why not spend some money trying to address it? I think on the positive side, the private sector has gotten engaged. And maybe you can comment a little bit about what you think's happening with private sector approaches to aging and what the company approach is. And I guess related to that, you know, there with biomarkers, there's disease prevention, there's disease treatment. What do you think the best clinical studies really are?
Yeah. So the first thing I'll say is, I mean, I think you're right. I think the private sector clearly has started to take the lead here. But I also would say that I feel like the paradigm is shifting in basic research and federal funded research. It's just really, really slow. But certainly I think that many more scientists today appreciate the role of aging biology, even if they've always focused on individual diseases. So there is progress. It's just been slow. And, you know, personally, I think that largely stems from a lack of leadership at the highest levels in NIH in this area. So what I would say about the private sector is that indeed we have seen a proliferation of companies moving into the area of aging biology. And one of the, I think, encouraging aspects of that is that they are taking a variety of different approaches, from purely computational approaches, looking at data that's already been collected from longitudinal studies largely and asking, can we detect patterns there that are relevant for testing interventions or understanding the biology? There are companies that are focusing on very, individual hallmarks of aging and trying to target those one at a time. And then there are companies that are actually starting to do clinical trials. And so we talked about the two that Restore Bio did, which, I think the exciting thing about that, even though ultimately the phase 3 clinical trial was unsuccessful, the exciting thing about that is that this is a company that actually took the approach of trying to target aging to have a specific outcome on an age-related endpoint, in their case, immune function. And there's another company called Unity, which has taken slightly different approach to targeting the biology of aging, but conceptually is very similar, to try to target senescent cells, which are one of the hallmarks of aging, to have impacts on clinical endpoints that are relevant for human health. So far, what we don't have is the first win, right? I mean, I think that's what we're missing, and that, to my view, will really be the watershed moment in the field, when we have the first true clinical trial success based on this approach of targeting the biology of aging. And I think we're close.
In your opinion, which hallmarks of aging would you target to successfully increase health span and lifespan in humans?
All of them. And I mean, that's sort of that's the one of the things that I have yet to really, in my own mind, come to a great model for how this is working. What we know is that some interventions seem to be specific for certain hallmarks of aging, but other interventions like rapamycin, you can find evidence that rapamycin affects most, if not all, of the hallmarks of aging simultaneously, which to me suggests that there is fundamental biology and sort of the network of genes and proteins that affect the aging process that ties all of these hallmarks together. And I think most people in the field would agree with that, but we don't understand quite how that's working.